Good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the Coal Scene. Over the past couple months, there seems to be quite a bit of activity on the mine safety and mine environmental regulatory front. In fact, there's been so much litigation, so many initiatives that have been coming from our federal government and EPA in particular, all of which have had an effect on permitting additional mine seams and coal mining operations. It's been very hard to keep up with. So today we're going to try to get a better understanding of what all's going on, what all the initiatives mean for coal mining here in West Virginia and for coal miners. With me here today is Mr. Jason Bostic, who is the Vice President of Regulatory and Environmental Affairs for the West Virginia Coal Association. And Jason's been right in the middle of much of this activity and is here today to try to help us better understand everything that's going on. Jason, thanks for coming by.
Appreciate the invitation.
Really appreciate you taking the time. I know there's a lot that's going on here, and you're right in the middle of most of this, and it seems like we're really trying to fight for our survival, or at least to have new mining operations permitted and existing operations to retain their viability. There's litigation, there's a lot of new regulations or requirements, some by policy, some by rule. We hear a lot of legislation. Why don't you give us sort of a quick thumbnail of where we are and what some of these issues are here today?
Okay, thank you, Chris. Well, Chris, let me start. We're about 3 years into what I consider a federal assault on the mining industry, not only in West Virginia, but Appalachia. And this started with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, and some guidance documents on how the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers processes permits, what we call Clean Water Act Section 404 permits, which are needed for most mines, be they surface or underground. EPA moved then into some water quality standards guidance that attempted to usurp or nullify, if you will, the powers of the state and its legislature and its Department of Environmental Protection to regulate mine water discharges according to the rules and regulations the state has put in place. As I said, we're about 3 years into that, and we're laboring under those guidance documents, so they're not exactly regulation, and we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that we can continue to permit new mines and sustain existing production.
You know, on its face, Jason, it seems like we're dealing with a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy here, and one of the things that's gotten lost is, you know, on the ground reclamation, or, you know, what the areas that we really looked at over the years. And, you know, it seems like we're getting so much better at the way we're reclaiming and restoring these mines. That's getting buried in all this mass of paperwork and red tape and, as I said, bureaucracy. So
it really is. I mean, people have lost sight of the goals of these environmental protection statutes and regulations, which is on the ground restoration and reclamation. And you know, we think the mining industry's got a pretty good history of being able to restore the land, not only to be what it was before, but usually even better. And from a water quality perspective, we do a great job protecting the state's waterways and have a good record of compliance there. But it's all been lost, at least I think, by the zeal of certain bureaucrats in EPA to hurt the mining industry to achieve some political goal.
I know that Senator Manchin, when he was governor, you know, at one point he said enough's enough, and he actually started to push back and filed a lawsuit against the federal government that had all these permits backlogged, and you know, it just seemed like there was a moratorium or a complete shutdown of the mine permitting process. And I understand current Governor-elect Tomlin has continued that lawsuit and fight against EPA.
He has, and we actually, the state received some good news in that lawsuit earlier this month. a judge in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. district, sided with the state and found that EPA and the Corps and these other components of the federal government had ignored the legal rulemaking process and the boundaries of their authority under Congress to write these guidance documents to target only mining. And that was a very favorable decision. It was the first part of a two-part case that Senator Manchin, now Governor Manchin, now Governor Tomlin, are pursuing against the federal government. The first part, where the favorable decision was issued, relates to permitting and how the Corps of Engineers and EPA consider these permits. The second part, which we're anxiously awaiting the decision on, relates to this issue of water quality guidance and who gets to tell West Virginia how to regulate water quality. Is it the state legislature, or is it an unelected bureaucrat in EPA?
Isn't that really sort of what's at the core of the litigation? That here in West Virginia, the state has primacy over administering and regulating, which includes the executive, the legislative branches of state government working together to administer the water quality program. And here you have a case where EPA and the federal government really encroach or try to take away the state's rights. States' rights is probably a pretty good characterization.
It is, and as much as people want to characterize this as being a mining issue, it's really not that. It's about the roles and responsibilities of the branches of government. And years ago, when Congress passed the Clean Water Act, it was envisioned that state legislatures and state government would have primary responsibility for controlling their water quality programs. And EPA, with these guidance documents, has trampled that authority. And what they've essentially done is nullified the existence of our legislature and our DEP. And that's a perversion of the Clean Water Act. That's giving power to bureaucrats that are not elected and taking it away from the people that the citizens of West Virginia send to the legislature to make their public policy.
I hear things like within some of these guidance documents, there are new requirements or new laws imposed on mining operations, particularly in the area of water quality. And these are requirements presumably that have not been enacted by a legislature or Congress. These are requirements that for the most part haven't gone through any rulemaking. They've not been subjected for public comment. These are requirements that in some cases have no parallel or no companion requirement for any other industry. So is that accurate?
It is, Chris, it is. The requirements in the guidance documents have not been through rulemaking. There was a half-hearted attempt, I think, on behalf of EPA to put it out to some form of public comment. But I think it's very telling as to EPA's motives and what they hope to achieve by the fact that they have chosen not to follow the legal rulemaking process. Because to write a water quality standard, it takes time. It takes lots of research, it takes public comment periods, it takes some review internally. EPA has chosen not to do that. I think because they can't justify what they're doing in West Virginia in the rest of the country, or they would try to write a national water quality standard. That's the other thing I think that's very telling. The Clean Water Act is a national statute. It has force and effect across this country. And if EPA felt that some of the water issues they observed before coal mines was worthy of a water quality standard, then it should be national in scope. Well, they have applied it only to Appalachia and only to West Virginia.
And of course, when we talk about water quality in this instance, it's not whether the water is pure or is of a drinking water level, but what we're really talking about here is that there's one set of an insect that seems to be impacted, and it's an insect that's not on any endangered species listing.
It is. What you see, Chris, below disturbance, whether it's mining related or otherwise, there is a shift in the small insect population. The insects aren't wiped out. The composition of the community changes a little bit. And scientists are still debating as to whether or not that has to do with cutting trees or disturbing the stream, or if that has something to do with the increased mineralization of the water. But regardless of what causes it, there's no evidence beyond that shift in the insect population that there's been impacts. We're still complying with water quality standards for things like aluminum, manganese, and iron. It's this shift that EPA's picked up on, and quite frankly, that's the best they can come up with, despite the amount of disturbance that is associated with coal mining and the enormous amount of energy we produce. That's the best they can come up with, is this small change in the insect population.
Well, and I also know that just from experience that the State Department of Environmental Protection, they have very strict water quality standards, and these standards are being met by every single mining operation in existence today. And there's steep penalties, and there's closure orders, and everything else. And in many instances, the water that's coming off coal mining operations, and I think this is so significant because I hear this all the time, but the quality of the water coming off of some of these, if not all these active mining operations today, is often better than the receiving stream or the quality of the stream that these waters that are flowing off of mining operations actually go into.
That's exactly right, because West Virginia's water quality standards are set at public drinking water standards, with the assumption that any stream that a mine or any other operation or any other activity discharges into will one day serve as a public drinking water supply. So our standards for individual parameters like aluminum and manganese are set to protect drinking water sources. And we're unique here in West Virginia that we do that. Not a whole lot of other states apply such stringent standards.
We are very fortunate that Governor Tomlin has maintained this crusade and the lawsuit against the EPA. As you said, we've had a favorable decision, which hopefully will send a message to EPA, because there's other parts of this litigation that are yet to be heard or yet to be decided. When are the remaining portions of this likely to be ruled on?
We think, Chris, probably the early summer, early part of June of next year, which, while I'm glad that the litigation's progressing, it's another example of why we can't wait for litigation to resolve these problems. There are some legislative measures that are up in Congress in Washington that would solve some of these problems, and I think they deserve much more attention than waiting for a judge to decide, because we really can't wait. And the issues, like we discussed earlier, this is a question of bureaucrats trampling the authority of elected legislators. So this is an issue that demands congressional attention. And because it strikes at the very heart of the balance between state and federal governments, this isn't a coal mining issue. This is any issue. If it's coal mining today, EPA could do this to the widget factory tomorrow, or the manufacturing plant the day after that. It sets a really dangerous precedent.
Well, you mentioned federal legislation. That's probably a good segue into the next issue I wanted to raise here or broach, because I understand there's a House bill that was championed by Congressman Ray Hall from West Virginia's 3rd Congressional District that has moved rather quickly and has been now passed by the full House of Representatives that is aimed at correcting and clarifying the role of the state and the federal government through EPA. Mm-hmm. That's Bill 2018, House Resolution 2018.
Yeah, that's a very artfully crafted piece of legislation. As you mentioned, Congressman Ray Hall was one of the lead sponsors. The remainder of our House delegation here in West Virginia wholeheartedly supported that. And 2018, despite what you may hear about it trying to wreck the Clean Water Act, all it really does is put sideboards back in the statute as to what EPA's authority is and how far they're allowed to reach in and cause correction of a state program. There's a legal process if EPA has a problem with a state water quality standard to require the state to revise that standard. And with these guidance documents, EPA has chosen not to follow that. They've circumvented it. So there's no redress available to the individual states, be they West Virginia or anybody else, to challenge EPA on that. 2018 would reinstall those types of protections into the Clean Water Act, as they were always intended to be there to start with.
Well, let's hope that moves through the U.S. Senate as quick as what it has moved through the House of Representatives. I know Senator Manchin's aware of this legislation. He's been very much involved trying to get it initiated, as has Senator Rockefeller, presumably. So hopefully this bill will make it through the U.S. Senate as well as the House. You mentioned one point here, and that is that this bill was introduced by Congressman Ray Hall, but yet our entire delegation, Congressman David McKinley from West Virginia's 1st Congressional District, and Shelley Moore Capito from right here in the heart of West Virginia, from Charleston, both were active in their support and advocating the passage of this bill with their colleagues. And that brings me to the point that it seems like our congressional delegation are working in close harmony with one another at the current time, at least as it relates to working on issues that are in favor of support the coal industry, and are all aimed at trying to get EPA to back off a little bit and put down their assault weapons, if you will.
Yeah, Chris, I've observed the same thing across the board, bipartisan support for these issues, and that's the other thing. Watching the remainder of the country and the remainder of the House of Representatives vote on 2018, there was a lot of bipartisan support there, because there are other states that are suffering from somewhat similar problems, maybe not as serious, but where EPA has overstepped their authority and has been way too aggressive to implement not only water quality standards or water quality control measures, but air quality things, air quality regulations. And it really has an impact, especially in an economy that's struggling to pull itself out of a recession. You have the potential to shackle what hope there is for economic progress with some of these overstepping regulatory measures.
Well, we mentioned our congressional, our House members, but Senators Manchin and Senator Rockefeller are certainly part of that, that bipartisan team effort underway, and Governor Tomlin's working real close with our congressional delegation, and it's good to just see that group working as a single unit. I think they certainly enhance their ability to be more effective inside the Beltway. We talked earlier about within this whole myriad of technical and maze of rules and policies. One of the things that's gotten lost is the quality of reclamation or land restoration, and even some of the post-mine land developments that we have going on around the state. That all seems to have just gotten lost here, pushed, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. When I travel around the state today, I'm just so impressed with the quality of reclamation work, stream protective measures, stream restoration, total land site restoration that's going on. In fact, areas that I recall that were protested 10 years ago, you have buildings and infrastructure and people working on these sites. They're former mine sites where you have a commercial development, places that where there was a protest 5-6 years ago. The area today has been totally restored. You can't even tell mining's taking place with the trees and the shrubbery and all that's taken place. And I think that these guys who operate the equipment out there, the attention that they pay to this detail, I mean, they are truly journeymen. They're among the best in the world operating this equipment. And they get little attention, little respect from mainstream media over the quality of the work that they do out there.
Yeah, they are true landscape artisans, I think, in being able to reshape and recontour the land. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. One of the things we did today was bring some pictures of reclamation, and hopefully we can maybe start doing that as a regular course of business on the show. But let me just point out, Chris, the photo that you see on the screen before you is an active operation. This is a contour mountaintop mine, and it looks like you would expect an active operation or a construction site to look. And these are the pictures that are frequently spouted out in the media as opposition to coal mining. But the site doesn't stay that way for long. As coal extraction continues, we reclaim it. This picture, Chris, would give you an illustration of the coal seams that are mined using surface mining. And as you can see, at the very bottom, that's a deep mine entry. That's a small underground mine that's extracting a seam that's deep enough in horizon to be extracted using those methods. But as you move up, you can see the black bands in the geology and how thin those coal seams are and how impossible it would be to put men and equipment in there to extract that coal. And those are typical of the coal seams that we have to extract using surface mining.
Well, the other thing that's obvious, just looking at that picture, is if you attempted to extract those coal seams via underground mining methods, you would have a very fractured and small portion of mine roof to try to support. You probably could not, from a geological standpoint, could not support that roof.
No, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. That's the other controlling factor with surface mining, extraction of coal. Just a quick shot of a typical piece of surface mining equipment. Again, this equipment's big. You're moving a lot of rock to get to a lot of coal, to a little bit of coal, relatively speaking. So the equipment has to be pretty big sized.
I'm forever amazed that the only when we see pictures of mining operations, typically in the newspaper, different news media or outlets, you typically see that active mining operation. You see the heavy equipment, you see exposed land, you see firsthand the impacts that the initial mining phase is having, but you rarely see the final product, if you will. You seldom see mine reclamation occurring, but you rarely see, if ever, the sites that we're looking at here, where you have some very mature reclamation and in some instances some completed reclamation.
Yeah. Well, take this picture before you, Chris, on the screen right now. This is a good picture of the progress of mining. You have on one side of the picture there the active mining, where you have exposed what we call high walls, which facilitate the coal extraction. And then as you look across the picture, you can see early phase reclamation where the contours of the land have been restored. We do in West Virginia rebuild mountains. But once we have the contours restored, some initial vegetation in, if you look at the very front of the picture, you can see that what was initially grass has matured into tree growth. And that's one of the things I'm particularly proud of that's occurred in my career, is a rewrite of mining regulations to promote tree growth. And we're starting to see evidence of that on some mining sites today. Here's just another picture. You can see the phases of reclamation along with some active areas in the background.
Well, we talked about we mentioned the machine operators and how these guys are true expert and journeymen at what they do. But we also have, we have biologists, we have foresters, we have people with education experience in horticulture, we have landscape architects, we have chemists, biologists. I mean, there's just a whole range of professional occupations and individuals that show up at a mine every day to participate in this. This just doesn't happen, I guess, is what I'm saying.
No, it doesn't, Chris. And that's one of the things that you'll see in some of these later pictures is a move within the last 10 years. We are pretty good as a mining industry with land reclamation, and some of these pictures, I think, help illustrate that. But one of the areas where we moved into by way of the permitting process and a desire, again, to protect the environment in which these miners live is land or stream reclamation. We have learned how to reclaim and rebuild the small streams that run to the very top of the ridge. These are ephemeral, intermittent streams, typically flow only in response to rainfall. But we have started to do that, and we've had some great success with that. For example, here there's a picture on the screen now that is a reclaimed, reconstructed stream channel on a surface mine. The land here was taken down about 300 to 400 feet. The coal was removed. The land was put back to topography through land reclamation, and now we have created this stream that captures not only rainfall on the mine site, but some seeps through the backfill. So it's very similar here. This one happens to be a more mature example of stream reconstruction.
The one thing that's coming to my mind, and I know the law is what it is today, but it requires, if I'm not mistaken, for mining operations to leave this land at a higher and better use than when they found it. So at a bare minimum, even if you don't come back and there's a building on here years from now, at a bare minimum, if I'm not mistaken, this land is left in better condition than when the mining company arrived.
That's certainly the goal of the reclamation statutes, Chris, and we try to do that every day as practicing coal miners and practicing environmentalists. And as you said, if a mine site is situated where post-mining land use development isn't practical, you do have to rebuild that mountain, make it look and act like the forest that was there before.
Well, I tell you, that's all very enlightening. We have showed on here on the program before some post-mine land sites where there's actually commercial, recreational activity on an area that was previously mined. And I know as a state we're becoming much better in that area than say we were 15, 20 years ago.
We are, because there was legislation passed under the leadership of Governor Manchin and then Senate President Tomlin that required any mining operator in West Virginia that wanted a surface mining permit to coordinate their activities with local land use development authorities to see if there was a need for developable land, so that we would never again miss the opportunity to create new economic opportunities for some of these counties and some of these areas.
And I think that's a growing industry in and of itself. I know our state Office of Coalfield Development with the Department of Commerce last year or the year before did a survey, and they found close to 1,500 jobs that exist today and are being sustained on post-mine land areas. And these are jobs that come from airport sites, come from regional jails and a number of other businesses, the Cabela's, Weirton, the big Milan Park and soccer fields around Beckley and Milan Park course in Morgantown.
Yeah, economic activities that probably wouldn't be available to this area given the terrain and its isolation if it wasn't for surface mining development.
Jason, there is so much going on in this area. We're going to have to get you back to elaborate. We're just about out of time, but just want to thank you again for taking time to come by here today and enlighten us on everything that's going on and some of the fine reclamation work going on around the state. So thanks so much.
I enjoyed it and would like to come back with more pictures next time.
Well, you got that invitation. Thanks again, and thank you for tuning in today on the library channel. Again, until next month, I'm Chris Hamilton, and this has been the Coal Scene.